So we go to Uncle George next, and we have Beth telling us about her father.
Or I could just sit here like Dad and say nothing. Dad was born in 1929, and so he was number 5 of the 6. He, obviously between Carl and Marie. And he died in 2008 of heart failure. His childhood. He was born about a month into the Great Depression. And he was only 12 years old when World War II started. So he got kind of a, I guess, a rough start in life. But one thing about when he was born, like they talk about the Gen Zers now, they're the first generation that were born into the internet and computers, that have lived their whole lives with that technology. Dad was born into there always being automobiles and tractors. I mean, before that, it was all horses. So, you know, he, from the get-go, dealt with, you know, motors and cars and tractors and all that, which became a big part of his life. But probably one of the big influences from his childhood, one thing that really affected him, was when he was little, he had scarlet fever. And for those of you that don't know what scarlet fever is, like chickenpox, it was more a childhood disease, but much more severe. It had a very high mortality rate, and these kids got really sick. Mom had it too. And he missed a lot of school. And so he got behind, and Grandma thought that the nuns could catch him back up. So in 4th grade, he was sent to St. Mary's in the Dalles. And I know some of the other kids went to high school at St. Mary's in the Dalles, but he was a little kid. And I wish I can remember the stories better. But I know he started there in the 4th grade, and I think he went through 8th grade there. He was down there for years. And so he was away from the farm, he was away from his family, away from home, all those years as a little kid. And I really think that kind of had an impact on him. But then he reached adulthood, and the first thing that happens is he gets drafted during the Korean War. And, but thanks to Uncle Frank, he didn't actually have to go overseas. He ended up spending his entire service in the States. I know he spent time in Nevada because he told me the story about how one morning he took one of the big army trucks up on a hill in Nevada, and he laid the windshield down the way those windshields folded down, so that when he watched the nuclear blast, it didn't break the windshield in the truck when it hit. And he's sitting in the truck watching it. He ended up at the Presidio, is where he was at the end of his service. He had been an MP, but he switched into the motor pool. And when we went down for Anne's wedding, David and I and Mom and Dad went down, and we spent some time. We drove around San Francisco one day, and we drove through the Presidio, and he showed us where he was. And we drove down to the foot of the Golden Gate Bridge, where he said the motor pool was, and that's where he worked, and that's where he spent his time. And when he got out of the service, he drove up the California and Oregon coast and back to the ranch, and never left again. He was just, I mean, I think partly because he'd been away as a little kid, and then he was away in the service, he was just happy being at home and didn't need to go anywhere else. So farming was a big, I mean, he loved to farm, but big passion for Dad was mechanics. He was amazing what he could do. I remember the pickup. Another year was a truck, one of the wheat trucks. The bulldozer was a year, and a combine was another year. He literally tore those down to the last nut and bolt. And you think I'm kidding, that I'm exaggerating on that, and I am not. he took them down to the last nut and bolt and repaired everything, repainted everything, and even ordered decals from, John Deere International, and put the decals on them too, to where when he was done, they looked like the day they came off the assembly line. It was just incredible, among all the other things that he did with that. And, but there was also a story, he was an engineer at heart too, because if he got a piece of farm equipment and he didn't think it was designed the way it was supposed to be, he'd take a brand new piece of equipment and tear it apart and rebuild it. And I wish I could remember, Karsten, maybe you do, there was some piece of farm equipment that he did that to. And word got back through the dealership and back to the factory, the engine, somehow they sent somebody out to look at this. And the next model year of whatever that farm equipment was came out with Dad's design on it. I wish I could remember what it was, but...
The TD14 142.
Oh, there you go. Whatever that is.
It came out to the 141 and 142.
Do you know what he changed or what he did?
The latch on the brakes. When you stepped on it and locked on it, you couldn't get them off without they're up there. You fixed it.
I saw him cut a cultivator to pieces and redesign the whole arms and attachment up to the hitch. Mom and Dad married in 1955. She was a school teacher, a home ec teacher from Pennsylvania. And she ended up in Oregon because at the end of the school year, when she was back there, everybody, all the teachers in the school got a raise but her and one other woman. And she wondered, well, why didn't we get a raise? And they went in and asked, and the principal or whoever told them, well, she's married. Her husband can take care of her. She doesn't need any more money. And, you're not married, but if you have a dad, he can take care of you. And Mom thought that was really pretty unfair, that all the men got raises and the two women didn't. So she said, I've got a brother in the Forest Service in Oregon, and I'm going out to see him for the summer, and if I get a job, I'm not coming back. And so she went to, she came out, got a job in John Day. The priest there one day asked her if she wanted to go see a real, Western farm and ranch, because he knew Grandma and Grandpa. So they drove from John Day to the ranch. And she said that Dad didn't say a word to her all day. Uncle Carl talked to her. But she said at the end of the day, they got in the car to leave, and Dad came up and leaned in the window where she was sitting in the passenger seat and looked past her to Father and said, well, if you want to bring her back anytime, go ahead. So she brought herself back, and they ended up getting married. I do know that one of the things that they said was, on one of their dates, they went and sat on the banks of the Columbia River and watched them build the dam. So, exciting date. They had 6 kids. I was the second. There was Judy, Beth, Alan, Nancy, Stuart, and Brian. 13 grandchildren, and if I'm counting right, 16 great-grandkids so far. And I guess the main things about Dad is, yeah, he was probably known as the quiet one. We used to warn friends when we brought him home, if Dad doesn't talk to you, don't worry about it. He doesn't talk to anybody. But he had so much, he was so easygoing and patient with everything. Took a lot to rile Dad. But if you pushed it too far, watch for that eyebrow. I can't do it, but when you saw the eyebrow go, you better stop doing what you were doing. Cassie got it. Show him Grandpa's eyebrow. Yeah. I was like, okay, knock it off, kids. But he loved having us around, and we loved being with Dad. I spent so much time in the shop in the field with Dad growing up. And one thing I know, Dad never preached to us. He never lectured. Never. It's just like, do this. And one thing I know is that if you did something stupid, or particularly if you hurt yourself, all he would do is he'd look at you and say, "Did you learn anything?" Okay.
Thank you.
Beth hit on George's patience and ability to fix, and I would not limit that to just mechanics. He just was talented, no matter what the problem was. If you went to George, he could take care of it. Donald was the same way. I always felt so lucky to have those two guys to help me out. I spent a lot of time with George when I first started farming, because farming is so much repairing. It doesn't seem like there's that much tractor driving. Usually you're repairing something. George was a tremendous help that way. The other thing, George was so generous with his time and abilities in the whole neighborhood. I remember all the well work that he did for the school, and I know probably most of the wells around the area, George was involved in fixing those up, and just,
Our basement was full of well rods.
I'm sorry?
He had a rack in the basement which was full of well rods.
Right. He made his own tooling, and took the time and went and, a lot of people were just up against the wall when the well quit. They were out of water, but they knew to get a hold of George, and George could come help out, and he just always did. But wonderful man.
It takes 30 seconds to get up here, and in 29 I can forget what I'm coming up. George spent 1 or 2 winters at my dad and mom's new house to help them get it done, to get them in. And I remember one night, it was dark, he'd been there all day. Mom hollered down the dinner was ready. And you're invited too, George. George went upstairs and sat down and ate a full dinner. And when he went to leave, Dad asked him, "Well, how do you do that when you get home and Pat's got a meal?" He said, "You just shut up and loosen your belt and eat."
When I was I think junior at Oregon State, I had a small engine rebuilding class that I was in, and I knew that I had to have a small engine to repair, so I went to Dad and asked him for an engine, and he had a Briggs & Stratton engine in the shop, which he gave me, and I took that off with me to Oregon State. And you had to take your small engine that wasn't working, and you had to totally take it apart, put it back together, and it had to work. If it worked, you passed the class. If it didn't work, you didn't pass the class. So I spent an awful lot of time taking that apart. You can imagine an engine that's been in the shop for a long time, dirty, and I really enjoyed cleaning it up and making everything look really shiny and clean, and presentation was most important to me. So I got down to the end of the term, and it was time to start it up. It wasn't the test, but I had to start it. So I started it up, and it took off just fine, and it ran for about 10 seconds. And then there was this grinding, crinkling sound inside of it. And I just thought, oh boy. So, it didn't take my brain very long to know what to do. And that was to put the engine in my car and head for home. Not just head for home, but head for Uncle George's. So I went to Uncle George's, and I pulled that engine out, and he put it on his tailgate. And, it took me the whole term to take that thing apart, and he had it apart right there on the tailgate of the pickup. And the carburetor linkage was just all mangled. And he said, "Well, I'm going to have to braze all of this and re-drill all the holes." And I looked at that and I just thought, oh my gosh. And I just thought, how lucky am I to have someone so talented that I can bring this to that can help me. So when he got finished, he said, come back on Sunday and I'll have it ready for you. So I came back on Sunday. He had it ready for me. I drove to Oregon State, had my finals that week. Engine started, worked great, passed the class. It's not what you know, really. It's who you know. Thank you, Uncle George.
The museum needed a windmill in Morrow. And of course, we called on Uncle George to bring us a windmill. We didn't expect a brand new working windmill. No. He went and got the best windmill that was laid down and the best top and totally disassembled it and tore it apart and put new parts in it. So it's a brand new windmill. Stood it up down there in Morrow, and it's there to this day, and you can turn it on and it'll go up and down.
I don't know how many of you, but I know my siblings all had the same experience that I did from this high. And that was spending hours and hours and hours at Uncle George's waiting for Dad in the shop. You know, and it'd be winter, colder than heck, and they'd be in there puttering on something, neither one of them talking, and we would, I know Beth would remember some of that. We would do everything, you know, keep ourselves entertained for hours out there, but I fondly remember that, even though we were bored to death. There was nothing to play with, just our own imagination. And but I fondly remember that shop, and I remember everything about it, because I spent so many hours in it. And then, as I got older, I had cattle trailers. And Uncle George, there was never any doubt in my mind when things broke on them of how to get them fixed. It was go to Uncle George's, and he'd drop everything and just weld them up and better than new, and away we'd go. He was just a great guy, and I loved him very much.
When I was young, which a lot of you may remember since some of you are a little older than I am, I was a very shy person. And my mother somehow along my life seemed to think I was an indentured servant that she could give out to people. And so one week, Aunt Pat had to go back to visit family. And Uncle George, I think all you kids were probably grown. I mean, I was probably 13, 14, so I know the girls were out of the house. And I was supposed to go in there and cook for Uncle George, and cook and clean, which was fine. But as you might guess, we sit down to lunch, and we have two big introverts staring at each other. And it was a bit of a game of chicken, but he was the bigger adult in the room, and he started talking. And I thought, my God, I had no idea. He talked about a lot of things, and it was such a wonderful time for me to get to know Uncle George, because otherwise he never said a word. And I think that was the key. You had to get him alone and just shut your mouth and let him feel like he had to step in and talk to you. So, and talked about a lot of things. It wasn't just the mechanics, which we all know he was a genius about. It was about a lot of things he thought about in life. And so, for me, that was a time I remember fondly.
My dad one day, I'll never forget, coming into the house, and we were in Kent at the time, and he looks at my mom and he said, you know, when I need to move a plow, I go hook the tractor up to it and I move it. Your brother just picks it up and moves it. You know, Mom always said that Uncle George and Uncle Carl was strong, but Uncle George would get you. He'd make it hurt. And that's probably very true. The very best compliment I ever had in my life was my mom had made me a new dress. I think I was about 14. And Uncle George came up to me and he said, that is a beautiful dress that you're wearing. I really like it. And it just that dress is still in my closet. Okay? I have it to this day. But, you know, when I think of Uncle George, I think, do you remember the commercial of E.F. Hutton? Remember how when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen, and then they do like this? That was Uncle George. If Uncle George opened his mouth, you knew he was getting ready, and everybody shut up and looked at him and waited. And it was usually worthwhile. It was a worthwhile thing to hear. He was a wonderful man. I loved him dearly.